I'm Simon Ellingham. I'm the Director of Sutton Schools Work, which I've been involved in now for about 3 years, having previously been a police officer for 30 years in London.
Brilliant. So Simon, what is Sutton Schools Work and what does it do?
Well, Sutton Schools Work, it's fairly simple, really. It's what it says on the tin. We are a charity supported by local Christians and churches of the Borough of Sutton. And we go into as many primary and secondary schools of the borough as we possibly can to help teachers and pupils develop their understanding and their knowledge of the Christian faith within the RS curriculum. And while we're there, to also support pupils in their spiritual, social and moral development and facing up to some of the challenges that might be affecting them today, and looking at it from a biblical perspective and giving an opportunity to consider what Christ might say about their particular issues.
Great. And who is Sutton Schools Work?
Right. Well, the face of Sutton Schools, myself as the director, I'm the link between the churches and the schools, leading the organisation from a employment point of view. We have a full-time secondary schools worker, Kate Canning, a full-time primary schools worker, Sarah Skinner, a couple more part-time workers. We've got Abby Bryan, who works part-time in our primary schools, leading assemblies. And then there's Sarah Kalembo, who's our part-time administrative secretary. She works in our office at Chi Methodist Church, which is where we're based. And they're the paid members of staff. We've got a board of trustees, chaired by Kevin Lewis, who's the vicar at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Carshalton. And we have a sizable number of volunteers, unpaid, but who give of their time to help out at schools as much as they can. And just as importantly, we've got a very large network of people who pray. So actually, when we say Sutton Schools Work, there are paid people, but there are huge numbers of people who contribute in many different ways.
Fantastic. So in terms of schools, let's talk about normal times.
Okay.
Because Sutton Schools Work, I know, has been going over 20 years. So there's been a lot of normal years.
Yeah.
So how many schools typically would Schools Work be involved with?
Okay, well, typically, obviously pre-COVID, it has affected us. In primary school work, there are 45 primary schools in our borough, and we are actively involved in 42 of them to varying degrees. We provide a half-termly assembly it changes each year by year. Sometimes one comes in, one comes out, but it's on average about 38 primary schools have an assembly from us every half term. Mm-hmm. A small number of additional schools might have another provision that we provide, something along the lines of a Discover Christmas or an RE day or a prayer, I Wonder prayer space day, or a 10-day Easter experience. There are other activities we do. So out of the 45, we are in or engaged with 42 of them, which is extraordinary. That's that comes off the back of a lot of work over 25 years. Secondary schools, we have 15 secondary schools in our borough, and we have contact with, we are involved with 11 or 12, depending on what's going on the years. And sometimes teachers move on and change. So we're actively involved in 6, really seriously involved, and an additional 4 or 5 will have additional things we do on an occasional basis. So that's a lot of children we see on a half-termly basis. I did a calculation once, and I calculated of the approximately 40,000 school children in the borough of Sutton, we see 27,000 of them every half term.
Wow.
Which is, it shocked me when I calculated, but because we do so many assemblies, so many interactive activities. Mm. So that's in normal times. That's represented by, as I said, mainly assemblies, but we do lots of other things as well. Secondary schools, we do quite a few Christian unions. So there's a fair lot of activity.
Yeah. So in a typical week, how many schools are visited by Sutton Schools Work in a typical week?
Right. Well, a typical week would be primary schools. There'd probably be 5 or 6 assemblies that week. That would be typical. there'd be 1 or 2 days activities, maybe a day discovering RE. What does Christianity look like within the RE curriculum? So we support the teachers in that, but we'd be in a classroom for a few hours and then move on to another classroom. We might do a Discover Christmas or a Discover Easter type thing, or a transit, depending on which term it is. Transit being the move from primary school to secondary school, year 6. Within the secondary school world, there'd be 5 Christian unions running that week, and we would have active involvement with at least 4 of them.
Wow.
There are 2 others in the borough that we don't necessarily attend. We are aware of them, and we occasionally attend just to show that we're supporting them, etc. But they're quite strong, so they look after themselves. Yeah. But there's 5 that we are heavily involved in and actively engaged with. In addition, there's secondary school assemblies, lessons that we support. There's 3 schools actively use us, and there's also some workshops that we've been piloting recently and beginning to become part of our work. Great.
And every year, Sutton Schools do something called Easter Experience. Yeah. What's that, and how many children come out to that?
Well, that's how I got involved in Sutton Schools work in the first place. Easter Experience is the opportunity for, generally speaking, it's year 4 children who are 9 years old basically, across the borough, to attend a church, and within that church they are entertained is probably an appropriate word, because they do love it, but they're given the story of Jesus in his final week of life, his death, and then gloriously his resurrection. And it's acted for them, and it's acted around them and with them. And the way we do it is we have 3 churches. So for 1 week, Carshalton Methodist host. Another week, it'll be Trinity Church in the middle of Sutton. And the 3rd week will be North Sheen Baptist. And the schools which are able to get to that venue, usually by walking, attend for either a morning or an afternoon, and the cast perform the play. And it's very moving. I've had the privilege of playing Jesus for several years now at North Sheen Baptist, and you are involved in this story. And it's a wonderful privilege as a Christian to be telling the story, but to tell it to children of that age who really soak it up, and they see it from a new point of view. They've read it in a book, they've listened to somebody tell the story, but they have to actually see it being acted out. And I think one of the most powerful things we do is at the end, because the children gather together, they've seen the play, they've seen Jesus being resurrected and the challenge that's given at the end, but they're actually then they're given the opportunity to ask questions. So now you've seen it, is there anything you'd like to ask? And the hands shoot up all over the room, and they are really keen to know, what did we feel? Why did we do something? They ask us as characters, and we're allowed to answer in our character. So they'll ask Pontius Pilate, why did you do that? Why didn't you let him go? They'll ask Caiaphas, why are you so horrible? Why did you want him to die? They ask Jesus, how did you get out of the tomb? Why didn't you just get down from the cross? And they're really challenging questions. And we answer them as best as we can, but from our faith. And it's wonderful to see their faces just beginning to understand, this is real. Is it? And then off they go back to their classes, and the teachers tell us it's so much better than them telling the story, because it means something. And I love it. I think it's one of the best things we do.
Yeah, and I love it too, in spite of the fact the only roles I get are Pilate and Judas Iscariot. But you have to go with what you're given.
You're typecast, Brian. You're typecast.
Thank you so much. So moving on, Simon. What about COVID? What is Sutton Schools work? We've been in lockdown for months and months, and schools, have been closed and open, and so on. What have you been able to do? What's the work been able to do during this season of COVID?
Well, I don't think it will come as any surprise to say we've been really struck by COVID. We were caught up in our tracks. We couldn't do anything. Schools wouldn't allow us in, full stop, which is a real difficulty for us, because that's the bread and butter of what we do, going in and seeing people. Fairly quickly, because it was around the time Easter Experience last year, Carshalton Methodist had run their week and managed to have a successful half a week, or 2/3, And then the other 2 weeks were cancelled, but we'd filmed the Carl Shorten Methodist production. So we decided to release that film in replacement of doing it live. And the film went down really well. We had several schools contacting us to say that that had come across really well. Thanks for doing that. It had helped them tell the story. And we felt, well, seeing as we could produce videos, we set about doing our normal day's work, but as a video. So we videoed assemblies, we videoed RE provision, we videoed Easter. So we did a lot of work regarding producing videos and have been overwhelmed by the response. We've been able to produce 1 primary school assembly video per week, releasing it to all the schools. Yeah. And many of the schools have told us that they were really, really helpful, really useful, because it helped them gather their children who they had in a classroom, or even many schools pledged their children at home and invited the children sitting in their bedrooms on their computers doing the home learning to actually watch it. And we discovered actually lots of schools loved it. And we've done that every single week, all the way through lockdown. And we were able to then move that into secondary schools. And Kate and one of our support staff, Becca Mackay from Carl Shorten Beaches Baptist Church, they produced a weekly teenagers thought for the week, and also a challenge regarding what is Christmas, what is Easter. And we've been overwhelmed by the response from many people around the country. In fact, as I say, around the country, we had a school in Belfast who contacted us to say they discovered our work online, loved it, and were using it themselves every week. And we've had quite a few of those contacts. So God has been amazing, enabling us to keep going. And in fact, if you now do the calculations, we were giving opportunities to far more children to hear the word of God, because far more children had the opportunity to hear us far more regularly. Yeah. So God has been able to do things through our work that we didn't consider before. Yeah. It's still not been as good as being in the school. That's what we're dreaming of. That's what we're waiting for. That's what we're planning for. But God has enabled us to still speak his word throughout this time.
Yeah, I think we could fairly say that you and the team have been doing what you can, where you are, with what you've got.
Yeah. Yes, and God will always be able to do more than we can think possible.
Yeah,
and it's extraordinary.
Yeah. So, how can churches and their members be more supportive, more engaged with Sutton School's work going forward?
Well, I always give 3 things that individuals or churches can do, and they've been probably the same for 25 years now. Number 1 is pray. We have many people who pray with us, engage with us in prayer. Another thing we've managed to do, we did online prayer Zoom meetings, which were, again, successful. We had slightly more people attending. I think many churches have discovered a similar response, but we've been encouraging people to pray. So if people were to simply pray for the work of God in the schools of the borough, it would transform our work. And so I'd always invite people to do that. You can do that completely unofficially, or you can contact us and be involved in our prayer life. I produce a monthly prayer letter that enables people to pray specifically. Secondly is to become involved. As I said before, we've got quite a few people, unpaid volunteers, who give whatever time they can in whatever way they can. We've got people who turn up at our office, they turn up at schools, they deliver lessons with us, and many people would run away from that. They'd run a mile before standing in front of a group of teenagers. We've got a few people to do that. We've got a dedicated team of volunteers who help out primary school assemblies. There's only a few people who do that, but we've got quite a few people who do other little bits and pieces. And I even go as far as to say there's a group of little old ladies who sit and cut up things every now and then for us, because that really helps. So there's jobs for people who are really happy to go and stand in front of an entire assembly, but there's also jobs for somebody who just wants to help out cutting up a piece of paper into shapes, because that helps. So there's a whole range. And finally, there's the financial side. We are paid to do our work. That's how we survive. That's how we maintain what we do. And we've got many, many people who support us financially. Your church is one of them. But even within those churches that support, we've got individuals who feel called by God to donate, to give. And that's always been so gratefully received. So all 3 areas are areas in which I'd say, if you want to help Sutton School's work, you've got up to 3 areas to choose.
Fantastic. Simon, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the people of Vineyard for their support over the years.